Hey guys, I'm Jess. I don't know much about Node, but I'm working with an investment group for my startup, and they suggested I come here to potentially meet some of you. I am looking for a co-founder for my startup, so if you'd like to know more, please come talk to me. I'm in the back of the room. Thanks.
Anyone else want to show something? Or yeah? I just plug in.
Can you hear me?
Oh, sweet.
My name's Matt Bourne. It's on the screen. I'm from Sprout Social. I'm a product designer over there. We use Node every day. I'm just up here because he said, "Does anybody want to share anything?" And my coworkers who were all supposed to come to this all bailed at the last minute, so I'm the only one here. Huh? Were they here last night? Oh, see. Well, not Jake. Different team, but yeah. He doesn't count, but yeah, he's exceptionally busy as well. So yeah, they are actually giving me a hard time because I stayed up till 3 a.m. working on this Node project. And then I said I was coming here, and they were like, "What, are you going to get up and talk and share about it?" And I was like, maybe. And so since you just said that, I might as well just show it to you guys real quick. I don't have any of this planned. I literally just built this last night, but it'll give you, for people who aren't familiar with Node, it'll give you a bare bones introduction to what it is. If you want this code that I built, it's actually a gist, gist.github.com, and I need to connect to the internet. I was tethered a moment ago. Sorry about that. Let's do it. Yes. All right. So I called it Muon. Like I said, it's just something I whipped together. You can pull it up on Blocks if you're familiar with Blocks. Blocks is this thing by Mike Bostock where you can just replace the URL and it gives you a presentation page for your gist. Shows you the README, it's pretty, and shows you all the code. So you guys can use either one of those to look at what it is, but this is it. This is the whole thing right here. It's got a package.json with some dependencies. The only dependencies are express, request, body parser, some Sass that I'm actually parsing in the browser. That's a whole another thing, but that's fun and interesting. And then there's this app right here. All I'm doing is building a server with Express, listening on port 1936. That's the year that the Muon was discovered. I'm a huge sci-fi nerd and a huge nerd altogether, so I do weird stuff like that, especially when it comes to picking port numbers. It's really difficult. And I just want to give you some background. I was a full LAMP stack developer for many years, PHP with a low barrier to entry. That was my language of choice for 10 years doing freelance. And now I've since gotten rid of FLAMP, gotten rid of MAMP, gotten rid of DreamHost, and all these weird things that I subscribe to that actually ended up costing way more to support than, there's a lot of ways to save and basically build whatever stack you want. So right now I use DigitalOcean for all my pet projects, which is nice because it's you get root access. That's what matters. So yeah, and since in the past year, Sprout uses Node for a lot of things, not for everything. They still use PHP, and there's some dirty stuff going on behind the scenes, Java and whatnot, Python. But that's most stacks, I'm assuming. But yeah, I use it for just about everything now. If I want to whip up a new project, I'm I'm doing it here. I just build an app.js, open up my file, and yeah, get it going. So I'll show you what I'm doing in here. So this is just this express.static is just basically loading any file in there. If I throw an index or an HTML file, it'll just load it up for me. But the two routes that are important right here are these two muon routes, a get and a post. This one, all I'm doing is sending a static JSON file back. That static JSON file has just some weird stuff in there right now, not much, but this is essentially a proof of concept. And then this is a post, which I was going to try and do something fancy. I tried to keep it simple. All I'm doing is writing to that same JSON file. And it accepts a post body that I then stringify and yeah, put in that file and basically send this empty thing back. I'm using Backbone and React for this as well, and that's what Backbone expects. Expects some sort of response. Doesn't have to be the exact object, but as long as you send that back, it's happy with a 200 request. So what does this thing do? I'm going to read it to you since it's far more eloquent than I could come up with right now. Uses Node, Express, Backbone, and React to allow data-driven applications in the browser to read data and save data to a static file on the server while keeping track of those changes in local storage. So basically, I just wrote some simple logic that initializes, checks in local storage for data. If it's there, it'll use it, and that's in case like you refresh or you leave the browser, come back, your session's still active. If there's no local storage data, it will get data from a static file, the static file you saw on the server, assuming you have write access, which again, root access is awesome. If you're doing it locally, you will. And if there's no static file on the server, it'll use default data and create a file as soon as the first set of data is saved. Persistent, intelligent, dynamic data storage. This is all a bunch of BS to make my idea awesome. It's not that awesome. It's really just a data flow pattern. So I'll show it to you real quick. This is just a HTML file. This is just a bunch of, instead of using, I got sick of Bower. I just like loading dependencies in the browser. And if I'm going to compile things for real for production, I will just use node require. Bower is really not necessary, but that's just me. So yeah, I got this thing going on here with basically I'm saying, hey, local storage, if you exist, let's get you. I'm going to make a backbone model. How much time have I got? A few minutes. How can I explain this? So this is basically the logic right here to distinguish between everything that I just said, whether I need to load from local storage, whether I need to fetch from the server, or make a new guy, which is what's happening there. And then, are any of you familiar with React? Have you heard of React? Facebook React? Some of you? Okay, React is fucking awesome. Sorry if I'm not supposed to say that. I'm a recent React convert. Used to use Backbone views. We use Backbone on the front end at Sprout. And React's essentially written by Facebook, behaves as a drop-in replacement for Backbone views. I know I'm going on a bunch of tangents here, but I'm just trying to give clarity to what I was working on. It's phenomenal. It's kind of like rendering the 90s where anything that changes, everything gets re-rendered every time, but the DOM only changes what actually changed. That's the best way I can put it. It's really intelligent, and they invented some diffing algorithm that makes it very smart, very fast, and much better than Backbone views and managing memory leaks and set teardowns and initial. Anyways, it's awesome. So that's the genius in this whole thing is just basically getting this model that I'm passing in that I created above from all that fancy logic, which really isn't that fancy, getting it to basically set itself as state on my view, and then from there I can actually use these values. So you'll see I'm using a simple Boolean right here. This is accessing state set on the model. That data is coming from state set on the view. That data is coming from the model, and when I update it, it handles making sure to save it to local storage. So every time I make a change, local storage is keeping track of it. Again, if I refresh, it'll be there. Why don't I just show you what I'm talking about? All right, can you guys all see that? So, oh, damn it, I created something on the bus ride here, and it's not found. Hold on, let me comment that out real quick. Things, go away, and I'll just delete you for now. Sorry, I do use Git. I could have just reset hard, but whatever. I'm a noob. No judgment. Okay, let's see if that works. Yay, it works. Okay, so you can see I actually am console logging my data here. So if I go ahead and toggle this theme, you'll see the background changed white. Very cool. Okay, why is that cool? Well, right now, this is just being saved in local storage. So if I refresh, it should stay. But on my initial load, I believe, I might be wrong. Well, actually, let's check the JSON.data file. See, in here it says theme dark. Why? Because I haven't saved that yet. So if I reload the data from that file, boom, it goes back to dark. Why? Because that's what was saved. But if I go in, I'm going to just change this a few times and do some fancy stuff. I'm going to exit, come back. Whee. There it is. Now, you see my initial state. Ooh, object. There's my data right there. And that's, again, because local storage was saving that the whole time. So if I close that tab, refresh whatever, it's still there. I can save those changes. See, save to static data file. You'll see in my console log in my terminal, I updated that file. And, yep, yay, it's all the same. That's pretty much it. It seems really simple, I know, but this is something that really bothers the hell out of me when I'm trying to make just a quick prototype, a quick gist using this stack technology and share it with people and get them to do stuff to it and actually have those changes persist in the browser without a database. Because, yes, databases are great, but when I'm trying to do quick, small projects that need to be data-driven, I really don't need that much. And so this has just been a big help. And if I were to give full disclosure, I'm actually building a fantasy football app, which is perfect for live drafts and week to week. I just need to crunch a bunch of numbers, save them, and if I come back and change like my options for who I'm going to draft on waivers this week, that's what I'm using this primarily for. But there's a couple. You could build a to-do list app with it. You could build pretty much anything with it that doesn't need to scale. Any questions?
Have you seen Orbit.js?
I have. I haven't used it.
So like you should look at it because it's got some things in parallel with this. And maybe it's something you can extend or
Okay.
scale from or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, let's Orbit.js.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know I've seen this before. Okay.
What is it?
Say again.
What is it?
Um,
It's an eventually consistent distributed like data storage modeling. It's kind of complicated to explain, but it sort of like lets you set up a way to persist data in many places.
nice.
Gives you some guarantees and callbacks and stuff. So.
Okay. One thing I failed to mention, I had mentioned these get and post routes. Backbone, when you do a fetch call, does a get, and when you do a save, does a post. So that's where that comes from, if that was confusing to anybody. And like I said, Backbone expects certain things, so if you don't give it what it wants, then it just breaks. But that's actually a good thing.
Can I actually share something before we start the presentation? It's really quick, but I think it'd be
Thanks, guys.
Shut all of my sensitive materials. Okay. So does anybody use Browserify? Like some kind of show of hands or whatever? Okay, cool. So there's a thing in Browserify called external bundles that if you're a power user of Browserify, just turn your brain off because the next 2 minutes is going to be a waste for you. But if you're not, external bundles are basically a way to package up libraries that you're utilizing that you're not actually changing at the moment one time, and then just refer to those in your application code that you're changing all the time. And if you've ever used Browserify, one of the limitations of Browserify is that it's slow. And if you're bundling in huge libraries, you're looking at like many seconds of rebuild time every time that you rebuild. And if you're like me, that really bothers you. So there's stuff online for this, but I thought I would just show you how simple this is, because I think a lot of people like tap dance around this problem for a long time before they finally commit to solving it. So I thought I would just show you an example of how to actually do that with libraries that people use like Lodash and stuff, which, in case you didn't know, like Lodash is a behemoth. So if you're including that in Browserify, like you're paying an enormous import penalty every single time that you rebuild. So let me just show you an example of how to do that. Sorry. So I have these two files. Oh yeah, I don't know how to Mac. How do you Mac?
You can drag it up there.
Here we go. Got it. Yes. You guys read that? Bigger? How do you do that? Is it like this? I'm a reluctant Mac user. Okay. Okay. So anyways, first of all, you don't actually have to do this. There's a fully CLI way that you can just do exactly the same thing as this. But I honestly, for sanity reasons and for sharing with other people, I recommend that you just build Node scripts that do your Browserify bundling. It's kind of tedious to do it any other way. So this one on the left side is the syntax for building libraries that you are going to require inside your application, but that you don't actually own and they're not going to change. So you just use basically something that looks like this, where you say, here are all the files that I want you to grab and put into the sort of the shared namespace between bundles. And then over here, this is the script that I run to build my actual application. And you can see all those .external calls are basically just saying, look for anything in your application that says require async, look in some other bundle in the global namespace for that object. So essentially, when I run this code, it's only going to repackage my actual application code. When I run this code, it's actually going to package up a bundle of all these libraries that I depend on. This is a pretty huge time saver. Like I can show you. I can't type either. So this is how I do lots of stuff. This thing might be. Oh, you know what? This is a fancy one, so I won't bother showing it to you. But this build file expects things like process arguments and stuff like that. But the bottom line is, when you have your index.html file, it's going to look like this. Sorry, this is a really hacky. It's going to look like this. So basically, you have two included script files. You have the thing that was generated with all your libraries, and then you have your actual application file. So that is a huge like developer agility win. So I recommend that if you're going to use Browserify, which in the first place, like I can't imagine not using it, frankly, then please do this. Like don't avoid this, because it's really a huge performance difference. And like one of the biggest things people complain about is the naive implementation of Browserify where you don't do this. And you have a couple libraries and you're looking at like 3, 4, 5 second build times, or worse, depending on how convoluted things are. So I can provide you a link to this if you're interested in just copy pasting it, because realistically I copy paste it from myself. So and then the other thing I wanted to mention is I guess I should have said my name. My name's Steve in the first place. The other thing I wanted to mention is I'm working on a project. It's a large project, but one of the pieces is this module, which I'm calling ProDash to try to stick it to the Lodash guy, because I don't know if anybody's like a functional programming enthusiast, but Lodash sucks for functional programming, and underscore sucks even worse. So I finally was like, I'm tired of importing this library and then mutating it to be what I actually want. So I'm just writing my own. So if you're interested in working on that library, I'm like a obsessive minimalist, so it's not hard to look at the code, and I have no dreams of grandeur except to use this myself. So couple of things that it does is it allows for different data types. You can have your own data types that you sort of define iteration for. And then the main thing that it does is it curries all of the functions that are in the library by default, which is a big deal if you're a functional programming junkie. So basically that just means that you can provide the arguments incrementally to a function and that it only evaluates when you provided all the arguments, which is kind of a big deal for asynchronous programming and functional programming and blah, blah, blah. So if any of that stuff is interesting to you, you just reach out to me or whatever. I'm easy to get a hold of. And with that, I'm actually looking for interesting opportunities in Chicago. So if you guys are aware of one or have one, let me know. Thanks.
So I'm still trying to grab Isaac, but if anyone else wants to demo something, you can let me know. But I want to show you something else you can do with Browserify, which is pretty cool. You can work with these transforms, and they let you modify Browserify in some way. And there's this one called Shortify, and I just give it this tilde. And then that's going to essentially replace that with project root, which is whatever I define. And then in your application, you can say things like this. So when you require something, you can say /, and that will just go to the root of your project. And it's amazing.
Wait, can you say that? What is this do?
So this is in Browserify. If over here on the right you see I'm adding this transform using a module called Shortify. And Shortify takes a key and a value. The key is something that it looks for, and the value is what it replaces it with. So project root is set up here just to be my source directory, so that when I require something somewhere else, I can say this /, and it just jumps up to the root of my project, and then navigates from there.
So you avoid all the
Yeah, dot. I used to say that you should do that very rarely because it implies that you have poor code structure. But in some types of applications, I find myself doing it a lot and not finding like a better way to organize the code. Like that's just the best organization that I can think of for that project. So I don't think it's really as much of an anti-pattern as I used to think. It still should be something you think about though. Like if you're constantly jumping up directories, you should think about how your code is structured. You might want to structure it a better way so you don't have to do that. But if you do want to do that, this is amazing. I love it. Just using tildes like this.
Didn't the Node people at one time call this an anti-pattern too?
Yeah.
Did they change their opinion on that?
No, they actually made it harder to do. Like I tried to actually get this working in Node, and I was having trouble like manipulating required to make it work. Because I didn't want to have to use like a different command, because I would have to either make that global or require it every time I wanted to use like my modified require. So in Node I don't do this, but this is mostly a front-end project, so I didn't really care. But yeah, Browserify is really great for front-end developments. If I can help it, unless I can help it, I just use that and grab all those Node modules. They're so tasty. If no one has something to show, is there something we can talk about?
I could show a few interesting things. If you I mean, it's not personal stuff, but stuff that people might find interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be personal. It just has to be Node related.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, we can just do some more demos and whatnot. Groupon is hiring. If you're looking for a job working with Node, we have like 40 some Node teams of people. I was also told by our recruiters we're looking for someone who knows Node and front-end development. They actually didn't tell me why. They said it was a secret project. So if you want some sort of secret project work, let me know. But we're also looking for just regular Node developers. We're also looking for some front-end developers, especially my team's working a lot with Ember.js. So if you want to work with some of that too, you can. Just let me know. But yeah, if you want to show some more stuff.
If anybody wants to do anything, I'm happy to first. But there's a
Sure.
couple of interesting things I've looked at.
Yeah. Okay.
This one? Hi, my name is Chen, and I'm going to show you a very small project I worked on. Basically, it's a HTML archiver. What it does is it listens on a port 3000, and you can post a list of URLs to hit, and then it just spawns Phantom.js processes. Yep. So let's, for example, let's post to github.com. So now this is a console. The nice thing is it pipes out the page that's actually rendered in Phantom.js to the console, so you can see any front-end errors. And it can spawn up to 25 or whatever number you feel that's right. So they can be concurrently rendered using Phantom. Then after it's done, it's exporting the format that you pass. It can be PDF, can be PNG, JPEG. It's just use built-in rasterizer of the Phantom.js, and then you have a PDF. So this actually was done for a project that we have because the project reads certain formats of data, but the data may change, so we don't want to build backwards compatibility with the code that can read legacy data. So whenever we want to bump the code version, we want to archive the currently in database data with the current code, because after we do that upgrade, we can never render that again. And the best way we can think of is just using PDF, because they are self-contained. You don't need HTML, you don't need JavaScript. Everything is packaged in one file. And the best free way to do that is just to use like Phantom.js, because it's essentially a browser, headless browser. So it can just do whatever your current browser does, and it's also a WebKit browser, so it's pretty much compatible with all the standards. So this little project serves that purpose very well. So in fact, it's only like 80 lines of code. You can see. So Express body parser. And I wrote a very tiny library, like throttle concurrency, which does like current pool size, maximum size, and current work size, and then just a bunch variables where you store the PDF. And then you just call this rasterize, which calls the Phantom.js rasterize in turn. And then you can listen on the child process, like on exit, you bump the available thread, and then you do the timestamping and stuff. So it's very nice thing to use, Phantom.js. That's it.
Can you just restate, so you can give it any page basically in HTML and it converts it to any file type you want?
Yeah, the built-in types is PDF, JPEG, PNG, I think also HTML in one file. So yeah, you can go to Phantom.js example. They have nice working code. You just need to see what they are doing. But this is pretty fast, like to render 25 websites. If the websites themselves are quick, then it can be done like within 10 seconds. And the pool size is based on your machine, your CPU and your RAM. And 25 was the best on my machine. Any number larger than that, Phantom.js just wait, because I think internally it also have a child process pool size. So even if you can spawn like 100, most of the thread will be inactive. So yeah, just some.
And one more thing, you can also target specific divs, right, on the page?
What's that?
You can also target specific divs if you want to just create an image of one specific, some content on that web page. You can do that.
I don't know if you can do like to asset. I think you need to do as a HTML page.
I think you can do that as an image as well.
So I just heard from Isaac. He was a little late getting off of the panel. He was at a conference today, so that's why we were doing this late. So he's on his way here right now. But yeah, someone wants to demo something else? We can do something that you wanted to do.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would just show us, information sometimes travels in weird ways, so I'll just show some interesting stuff. Okay. So, are we computering or no? Maybe. Okay, so first thing I was going to show, which I won't show because you actually just showed it, which is really bizarre, is literally exactly the same application that he has. I wrote exactly that, literally, exactly. So that's pretty weird, or shows that people think this is a good idea. But one thing I wanted to mention, just kind of extending from what you talked about, is so this application also has arbitrary concurrency that's configurable, but it does it by using some parts of the async library that a lot of people don't know about, which is basically async queues. So if you don't know about async queues, they kind of explain themselves, so you can just go look it up. But basically, it's a way to declaratively say how to process asynchronous jobs in batches with certain amounts of concurrency and whatever. So that comes up periodically in programming of various kinds, and so just knowing that the async library has a queue mechanism in it can save you some thinking through the bookkeeping involved in doing that. So, and I think their API is pretty good. Like I'm really like particular, and it worked for me just out of the box. So, so that's just a tip. And then another thing that I did to get around your concurrency limit is to just spawn many phantoms. So I have a queue of phantoms, and then all of those phantoms have a queue of pages. So you can control both the number of concurrent pages that any phantom has open and the number of phantoms that you have open. So that's just like a little FYI thing. And that's on my GitHub if you're actually interested in it. I'm not super pleased with the code or anything, but it does what it does. So another thing that I wanted to bring your attention to, because a lot of people probably aren't aware of it, is something called StackGL, which is a pretty cool little project on GitHub, and they have a web page and whatever. But specifically, if you're interested in playing around with OpenGL at all, this is a really nice sort of, I don't know what you would call it, Node-style set of libraries for building OpenGL demos and games in a kind of idiomatic Node way, and it uses Browserify. The assumption under the hood is that you're using Browserify to do everything. But in particular, there's this package called Shader School, which is pretty good, although as a disclaimer, I must say it could use some work. It's kind of a brilliant package that they put together, but it's a little rough. So you have to have a little bit of stick-to-itiveness to really get through it. But if you want to get a crash course in how to write shaders, it's not anywhere near as hard as people say it is at all, and this is a really convenient way to do it. So you basically run this on your local machine. It runs on localhost, pretty much walks you through it, and it's pretty cool. And I actually thought that that the shader stuff was pretty interesting. So for what it's worth, StackGL and Shader School is there. Another thing that some people may not know about is Node School, which is, I don't know if this has probably come up many times in this group. So Node School has recently exploded in terms of content, and also they made the website almost unbearably bad, which I don't know why, because the previous one was actually kind of cool. So I don't know why they did this. But anyways, there's a lot of modules up here now, including one on Express, one on Async, one on WebGL, Lodash, blah, blah, blah. And then as a little personal plug / plea for help, because I don't like maintaining things, I wrote that one, the Promises one, which is it's pretty good, but it's kind of out of date because even though all the core Promises stuff is still very much correct, it's using a kind of gnarly version of this Workshopper module that all these are built on. So anyways, if you're interested in either Workshopper or Node School or Promises or any combination of those things, I could definitely use somebody's help to rewrite that, because the new version of Workshopper is really infinitely better than the current version. So, but then just on a less personal level, if you're not familiar with this website and you're interested in a Node thing, you should really check it out, because there's a good chance that at least popular stuff is covered here. And just to give you an idea of how this works, it's a actually don't remember how it works. But anyways, the website explains it. So you can go, basically what you end up doing is running this thing on your computer. It's an in-console application that has a bunch of lessons in it. You write the code for the lessons, you submit your answer in your own console, it provides you feedback. It's totally offline, and it's pretty awesome. So really can't recommend that enough, especially if you don't really feel like reading documentation, which I almost never do. Another thing that's interesting, this is kind of going in a completely different direction, is how many of you guys are familiar with this guy, with James Long? Do you know who he is? He's a Mozilla researcher / developer, and he's just like a JavaScript junkie. And he writes these long, pseudo-poetic blog posts about sort of cutting-edge things in JavaScript, a lot of ES6 stuff. He also kind of has required a habit of porting ideas from Clojure to JavaScript. So if you're familiar with Clojure or interested in Clojure, it can be a good way to like get some of the niceties of Clojure and the explanations behind those without having to deal with the difference in syntax and stuff. So this recent post is about transducers, which is a pretty cool thing in and of itself. It's basically sort of a way to provide generalized transforms to different data structures. So when you think of like array.map, array.filter, that kind of thing, it's reducing, it's an unfortunate choice of words, but it's reducing all of those to reduce operations and then rebuilding them back up in a way that's much more composable and data type agnostic. So it's kind of hard to like, who knows what I just said, but if you look at it, I think it'll be pretty clear to you. And it's very powerful idea. Like it's probably worth reading that once or twice, because it kind of demystifies a lot of things. So, and he also has a library built around it now, for whatever that's worth, with pretty good documentation, pretty good README, showing you how to actually do this to get something actual done. So it's pretty cool. And then he also has another blog post on CSP, which is like an async model that Go uses, that Clojure uses, and now people are starting to port to Node, especially with generators. So if you like really hate dealing with all the callback stuff, or you're not convinced that promises are a good idea, or you don't know what RX is or whatever, like here's just another contender for your attention for how to deal with async programming. But I actually think this one is pretty good. So there's that too. And then I think on a more personal level, I don't know if any of you guys are game developers, either by night or by day, probably not by day. If by night, that's also fine. I'm working on a game engine from scratch, using a lot of basically as much ES6 syntax and kind of bleeding edge things that will break as possible. So if that's something that you're interested in, software that kind of works, then let me know. And then I would also say too, just as an aside, if you never tried the web audio API, you really, really should, because it is crazy and really interesting and nowhere near as hard as people assume it is. And the stuff that you can do in one night with the web audio API is pretty satisfying. So recommend that. WebGL, I would say the same, but honestly, like OpenGL is not satisfying at all. It's really miserable. But if you're interested, it's also not that hard. It's just a very C-like API, and it's kind of gross. But it could be interesting for like a night or two to understand how something like Three.js is built. And again, it's not that tough. So on a node level, one of the things that I have found that's really good to do basically is to be in the StackGL IRC and also on the node mailing list. I think a lot of people are not on the node mailing list, but there's a lot of subtext and a lot of like information that sort of only travels through those circles that can be really useful that you won't necessarily see on the Twitter level. So,
what was the first one you said? The first resource? What was the first resource?
Just being on the StackGL IRC and to a lesser extent the Node School IRC. And like all IRC channels, sometimes you'll go in there and like it's like a ghost town. But on the other hand, it's one of the only places to access in long form people that are involved. So because Twitter is kind of crappy for that. So yeah.
What do you suggest for using ES6 on the browser currently?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I tried different things. I don't recommend Tracer. If you guys are you guys familiar with Tracer? Is anybody familiar with Tracer? Yeah. It's kind of academic by nature. It's supposed to be. But the problem with Tracer is that you have to package a runtime to make some of the things work, meaning that there's a piece of Tracer that is runtime dependent. And so it slows your code down like crazy, and it also increases the size of your dependencies in a way that kind of is unfortunate. So for a lot of stuff from, especially if you don't care about stuff like let scoping, you know what let scoping is? So like var scoping is scoped to the nearest function call, and let scoping is going to be scoped by the nearest block, kind of like a C-like language is. But that is hard to shim, and the way that they shim it is by using try-catch blocks, which are really slow, and V8 doesn't optimize them. And if you're a JavaScript developer, like I don't really know why you honestly would care about that, to be honest. Like, I mean, the let thing is fine. It addresses this tiny subset of bugs that you can get around completely. But anyways, there are other projects, like he was showing earlier, the transforms for Browserify, so that's how I do it too. There's a transform called ES6ify. There's one called like Transform ES6. There's many of them. The key thing is to just look at what they actually support, because they've all kind of implemented different parts of the feature set. So it sort of depends on what you care about. And some of the more ambitious features require either really unperformant code or a runtime library. So for me personally, I don't use anything that requires the runtime, which is actually easy to do. And my favorite thing is actually like already available in CoffeeScript, which is just destructuring. Like I'm a big fan of the destructuring syntax. Are you guys familiar with that, destructuring? Do you know what that is? It's basically like a way to say if you have a module that has like 5 functions in it that are called like map, reduce, filter, whatever, there's a shorthand way to pull those out of an object and give them shorter names in the local namespace. So you could just say destructuring argument filter map blah equals this object, and then it will make functions called filter and map available in the local namespace of your file. So it's like one of those things that you see it and you're just like, oh, I understand what this is. But it's really handy, and when you come from CoffeeScript, like not having it is kind of depressing in a certain way, because it basically just increases the size of your require blocks by 50 to 100%. especially if you use a lot of libraries, which I sometimes do. So that would be the long form answer to that. I do actually have a game. It's a really bad game, but it's a multiplayer networking game that I just hacked together using some existing engine plus some probably terrible network code. But it also uses ES6, so you could like look at that if you wanted to see the pipeline or whatever, and I could send you a link. But that actually did use Tracer until I ripped it out to replace it with something that didn't have the runtime. Because the runtime is huge for Tracer. It's thousands of lines, and it like slows down Browserify. And as I alluded to earlier, that's anathema to me. So yeah. So are we ready to go now? Okay, cool. Sweet.
All right, so our speaker is here. You want to come set up? I am. Hey.
Sorry about that.
Nice to meet you. Oh, no problem.
Cool. What do I need to do?
You just plug in the black one.
Oh, the black one. Oh, wow. Check that out. Power. Right. That's on the other side. Hi. Sorry to keep you waiting. It's really cool. I love. So I came here for this API Strategies conference. It's happening down the way a little bit, and nice, that's working, right? And so I was like, hey, Sean, I'm going to be in town. I actually like going to the meetup better than going to the conference. And like, how many people here are actually developers? Right. So like, we can actually have fun and talk about tech stuff. I mean, API strategies are very interesting, but I need to geek out sometimes. But anyway, so I was on this panel that started at 6:30, and they're like, you're going to be done at 6:50. Well, that didn't really happen. So anyway, sorry to keep you waiting. I'm going to try to make it like at least entertaining, if not interesting. So, okay, cool. How many people do Node.js for like your day job? Okay, so like professional developers, right on. So we're like at a pretty good level here. Is anyone like a beginner? Not as much. A little bit. A node beginner. Sorry, a node beginner. Yeah. Okay. I didn't bring too much beginner stuff, but we'll just you'll learn fast. Okay. So cool. Here we go. Yeah, I guess just thanks for having me. It's really nice to meet Node developers. I really like it. So this is just about me. So I guess I have to stand here. So I grew up in New York City, and I moved out that's a picture of Stanford. I moved out to California to go to school. And then this is sort of a career background. I started my career at Cisco. I was working on the other iOS, the one that runs the routers. And then I started a company called Issac, and then I went to a startup called Wiley. It was an APM company. Anyone know Wiley? Wiley Technology. Wow. Yeah, it's just so old school now. That's crazy. It was a monitoring. It's basically the precursor to New Relic, and the whole team of New Relic is old Wiley people. It was for Java. It was the sort of Java monitoring tool. We were acquired by CA, which wasn't that fun. I left and started a company called Makara. It was Heroku for Java. As such, it was acquired by Red Hat, and so I'm sort of, at least me personally, from a professional perspective, I'm best known as being sort of the father of OpenShift. I created Red Hat OpenShift and ran that for 2 years. It got to 2 million applications, and I was like, all right, this is big. I want to do a startup again. And along the way, I tell you that story because along the way I met 2 wonderful people named Bert and Ben, who were some of the Node.js core maintainers. And what I'd noticed at OpenShift was, wow, the most popular thing on OpenShift, and this is 2012, the most popular thing on OpenShift in 2011, 2012 is Node.js. I mean, not the most popular, but the fastest growing. And I thought, that's really interesting, right? And actually, in the PaaS world, Heroku, Cloud Foundry, all these things, right? Everybody knew each other because we all used to go to meetups. Actually, we had a meetup in San Francisco that was like the cloud meetup. And in the early days, it was like me and James from Heroku and Derek from Cloud Foundry and a bunch of guys from CloudKick and stuff. We're just all like sitting around in a room like, oh, we need an abstraction layer for calling Amazon. What should we do? You know, and so we would just like collaborate on stuff, and then we all made companies, and then all our companies got bought, and all of us are competing with each other. We're still friends, like that. You know how that happens. So I just called up a couple of friends. I was like, James, what's the fastest growing thing on Heroku? And he's like, Node.js, dude. It's Node.js by a long shot. I was like, really? But you guys started on Ruby. He's like, I know, but it's Node.js. He was at Salesforce at the time. And I called up Derek at Cloud Foundry, acquired by VMware. I was like, Derek, what's the biggest thing on Cloud Foundry? Like, are you seeing Node? He's like, oh man, don't tell anyone, but Node's not only the fastest growing, it's the biggest. I was like, but you own Spring. like isn't Spring the biggest? Like on mine, it's JBoss, right? He was like, no, shh, it's Node.js. I was like, okay, this is really interesting. So when I met Bert and Ben, I was like, okay, what's up with this? And I was a newbie, right? So then I was the new guy. I was coming into Node. I'd done a little JavaScript. I had to learn Node.js. And kind of that's how I ended up in it. Now I work with all these people. So just to give you, no one ever sees the faces behind. Like you go on GitHub and you see like Piscosaurus, which is Bert's thing, right? It's, what is that? And you see like other RFang, right? So all these guys are Node.js core committers, core maintainers. Bert and Ben, the longest standing guys on the project right now. They were working with Ryan Dahl back in the day. Now that Isaac Schluter's gone on, those are the two most senior dudes. The other folks all also make contributions to both Node. The guys on your right there are the Express maintainers now, along with Jonathan and Doug, who are the ones that sort of took it over from TJ. So just now you know people who work on Node. This is what we do all day. So we make commercial products, which I'm not going to talk too much about because it's a meetup. Nobody wants to hear about your product. But we do a lot of open source. I mean, basically, the three biggest things that people know us for maintaining are Express, LoopBack, and Node.js. Which largely, just to point out, like a lot of the maintenance work in Node.js is actually in libuv, but nobody cares. They just want it to work. So we do all this geeky like C++ stuff that nobody cares about just to make Node.js work. But anyway, that's like kind of stuff that we do. So good. It was less than 5 minutes, and now I can get into like interesting stuff. Okay. So I know what you all want to know is like, because the title of this thing was what's coming in Node.js, right? So I have to like get this out of the way up front. When is V12? I don't know. That's the answer. We can talk about this like afterward over a beer if you want. The governance structure of Node.js is that Joyent releases it. So they release it when they feel like it. And we don't release it separately because the community gets mad if we do that. So to be good community steward or citizens, we don't release Node.js separately. We wait for Joyent. So whenever they feel that they want to release V12, they will. But you can use it today. There's a release branch called V12. You're welcome to use it. There's quite a few people actually using it. And if you need help with it, we'll fix stuff. And if you want support on it, we'll support it. And we're not the only ones. NodeSource will support it too. So, go ahead and use it if you want, but I don't know when it's going to come. It's basically there. But I will tell you kind of what needs to happen and how you can contribute, which would be great. And also like what's going to happen after Node V12. What's in Node V12 is right there. So it's cluster improvements, performance, don't get too excited about multiple instances in a single process. Everyone's like, yes, threads. No, it's not threads. As you may realize, there's no way to do threads in Node, right? Because the language doesn't support threads. And that was actually my first question when I first met Bert and Ben. I was like, okay, guys, how are we going to do threads? And they're like, yeah, go talk to TC39. TC39 is the JavaScript like language forum where everybody decides what the language is going to do. So this is just a way of kind of creating some efficiency for mostly browser-side, actually, versions of Node. So a great example of this is Atom.io. So it's an IDE made by GitHub. It allows you to, it's written in Node, and it allows you to embed Node, so to add plugins and stuff to it. And it uses this capability where you can run multiple versions of Node inside of Node. Multiple instances of Node inside of Node, in order to provide that functionality. So if you were like trying to build some embedded thing where you had, that's the use case. And that happens quite a bit. People embed Node in stuff. For example, the Tessel, have you seen the Tessel? It's this little Arduino-based hardware thing. It doesn't quite have Node in it, but it has something Node-like in it. So it's basically sort of JavaScript on a board. And you've used it?
Oh, dude, new modules just came in. My team at where I work, we just ordered some new ones. So we got a Bluetooth module, a camera module, some accelerator module, other things.
I got mine. I think I saw the future. It was like, it's a little board like this, and it has JavaScript on a chip, essentially. It's not really. And you basically, you code this thing in JavaScript, which it's so imagine what that opens up, right? You don't have to learn embedded C to write Arduino code. And with the incredible amount of stuff that we're seeing on Node that has to do with IoT, I think this is amazing because, of course, the fun part is for all of us, right, is like front end, back end in the same language. Well, now you have like the new front end, which is hardware, and back end in the same language, right? It's sort of mind blowing. It's really neat. If you'll permit me one slide before I do a demo. Speaking of that topic, this is really germane. So back in August, we had a big earthquake in California. I know you really care. Out here in the Midwest, it's just not your problem. But permit me a little hometown advantage here for a second. We had this big earthquake, and it was centered in Napa, and like a lot of wine got lost, boo-hoo. But this is a graph that Jawbone put together of do you see how it works? Like on the left, the scale, the y-axis is the number of people who are awake, and the x-axis is time. So you can see when it happened, right there. And then the people that were closest to it the more of them were awake, and they stayed awake longer, right? So that's interesting in itself. This ability to measure human behavior is totally interesting, right? We haven't had this before. We can see seismographs, but we've never seen like what it affects on humans is. And what's sort of more amazing is like, what does this mean for humanity that we can do stuff like this right now, right? It's kind of nutso. And the reason I bring this up at all in the context of Node.js is that this was powered by an API, right? Like how did that data actually get from the up, which is the Jawbone sleep monitor, to the cloud where they did this analysis? It went there over a JSON REST API. Literally, I looked it up. And you too can use that same JSON REST API to input data into their cloud. That is why we're seeing, I believe, I kind of know because I see a lot of the commerce side of Node, that's why we're seeing an amazing explosion of Node use is because of these APIs, because people need to make APIs to power all kinds of stuff like that, like all kinds of devices and mobile apps and things like that. It's really interesting, right? I'm going to go into that a little more, but it's already been 10 minutes, and you can't go 10 minutes without giving a demo. So I just want to demo something. It's not going to be that great, but I just have to demo something. So what I'm going to demo is some of the new clustering capabilities, because I mentioned like Node has new clustering capabilities. So Node has really nice clustering. Have you used Node Cluster? Anyone? Node Cluster? Yeah, so Node Cluster is a little bit annoying to set up, but basically it lets you run multiple processes. It shouldn't be called cluster because in any other environment, right, it would be like in a Java or a Ruby server, you have a process and it spawns threads, right, for new requests. And what this thing does is it spawns processes for new requests, right? It does what Apache does, but we call it a cluster. And by the way, on Linux and on Mac, threads and processes are the same thing, right? So it's basically, so don't let anyone tell you that Node's not multi-threaded, right? Because it's just as multi-threaded as Apache is, right? And so anyway, that's kind of the idea of Node Cluster. And in V12, it got upgraded with both performance enhancements and round-robin load balancing. So now we wrapped a little open source sort of utility around this called SLC. So I'm going to start a thing over here called SLC PM. It's a process manager. Does anyone use a process manager? You probably do. You just don't know it by that name. Like Forever is one. Yeah, PM2 is one. So we have one called SLC that we think represents best practices for how to do a process manager. But in Node, there's lots of opinions about everything. So if you don't like ours, use a different one. But for enterprise uses, we feel that this represents like best practices. And so then what I'm going to do is, so in that window over there, I've got, where's my mouse? I've got the process manager running. And then in this window over here, I'm going to make a change to the app. So I've got an app that I built here. So I'm going to upgrade the version to 1. something, because by the way, NPM doesn't work right if you don't start with 1. something. So I know, have you run into that? Yeah, exactly. So NPM assumes semver, but it doesn't work underneath 1.0. So even though it's a common pattern in Node to start everything with 0. whatever and kind of never get to 1.0, i.e. Node itself, don't do that in your modules, because you'll expose a set of things in NPM that assume semver and they assume a 1.0. So just take it from me. And then what we're going to do is like, what's your favorite NPM module? Anything. I think Express is that? Async. All right. All right, so we'll add async. It could be that async is already a dependency of this project. I assume that there might be, I don't remember the latest version of async, but we'll just assume there's one past 1.0. All right, so I made a change to my app, right? So I'm not going to git commit my change, updated version. Okay, so I'm working in a Git repo, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this, again, like a little utility called SLC build, which basically represents what we think is the best practice for doing deployment. So it builds to a deploy branch, right? So it builds all the deployable stuff that you want. So so takes out development time dependencies, right? And kind of separates out binaries and stuff like that, and builds it to a deployment branch. I don't have Wi-Fi though, so it's not going to work. Which one do we need? Group on mobile. I was like, why is this taking so long? It's because there's no network. There we go.
Yeah, so it's, I'm trying to type it correctly.
Cool. I don't know if this, I might have to like restart the NPM here. Yeah. Just gonna, yeah, okay, we're just gonna do it again. NPM install. Oh, it's because that, okay, well, fine. So we were wrong about async. That's all right, we'll just take it out. Git commit. Yeah, so this is gonna just build to a deploy branch. And it's showing you what it's doing there. So you can script this yourself. We just scripted it for you. So npm install, ignore scripts, run build, right? Prune, add, blah, put it onto a deploy branch. And then we're going to do, so I previously, I did a git remote. So over here is the process manager, right? Assume that's on another machine. So I added a git remote that points at that process manager. So now I can just git push. Oh, that wasn't going to work. Git push. I called it laptop, right? And then, so that's pushing. And then you can see over here what's happening is that it's going to take my changes off of the deploy branch, right? It's going to run a build, right? and it's going to redeploy them. And what it's doing too is it's doing a zero downtime redeploy. Right? So it's upgrading worker by worker, right? So that's the kind of cool stuff you can do with Node Cluster, right? So that's nice. And if you want to write that yourself, you can use that, or if you want to just use, like, you kind of saw me using SLC. It's open source. You can see what we did in there. You can use it. And there's a nice blog on the StrongLoop blog that sort of describes what we think is the best way to do that, or you can kind of have your own modifications of that if you want. So anyway, that was a little demo of cluster. Just you have to demo stuff. Okay. Keep it interesting, right? We can't just talk about slideware all day. Whoops, go. I actually really like that zero downtime deploy and the git push. It's a really nice way to work, right? That utility, by the way, also builds to a tarball. So you can build to a tarball and then push the tarball, like, manually. And it has that in it too. You can say SLC deploy to the PM on this port. But more importantly, what we see in enterprise use cases is that you build to the tarball, put the tarball in Artifactory, right? Which is what, like, release teams want to have, is some sort of binary repository of everything they ever deployed. And by the way, since we're building to a deploy branch, you now see everything you ever deployed, right? Because it's on the branch. So if you ever want to roll back, you can just roll back to the previous version on the deploy branch. And this keeps your deployment separate from your development. It's a really nice way to do things. It's a little annoying to set up, which is why we just scripted it. Right? So take a look at that, and just being able to do git push is really hot. Okay, so this is kind of back to the idea of what do people use Node for? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because when we think about where does Node need to go, it's like you have to look at the use cases, right? So there's this sort of so-called API economy happening, and here what you see is just that with mobile and then IoT, we have more and more endpoints, which is driving up a different set of requirements on the server, right? And then we have more and more transaction volume. Now, the endpoint issue is really important because as you have more and more endpoints and you want to hold open more connections, that's where Node shines, right? Node's just killer at that. 50,000 connections on a server, it's beautiful, right? And the sort of other environments, not the language, but the environments that people are used to with Ruby and Java just don't do that very well, right? Because they use one thread per connection, they run out of space. They largely run out of RAM, but also CPU. So Node really shines in this context, and I think that's why we're seeing incredible adoption of Node. And the way, and now I'm going to give you things you can explain, because, like, hey, I want to use Node for more projects, but my boss says I can't. Here's some of the arguments you can make. Well, hey, show them this chart. Look, this is the future. As things are happening, the number of transactions are going up, the number of endpoints are going up, a new architecture is needed. What's it going to be? Well, Node is super popular. Why? This is why. Here's another thing. We have these app servers. They're designed to speak HTML. That's what they were built for, right? Now, it may be that they've evolved a little bit, and sure enough, they have JAX-RS in them, so you can do REST APIs. The crappy way. But you can, right? But this requirement is different. We need a server that speaks JSON, right? Now, yes, the old one can speak JSON, but it wasn't designed to speak JSON. Ours was designed from the ground up to speak JSON. It's an API server. That's what it's for, and it's for the future, right? It's for mobile and IoT. And that's indeed, we're a commercial vendor. We support people, like big people in production on Node.js. That's exactly what they're using it for. I'm not making this up. This is actually what our paying customers do with Node. On top of that, there's really a generational change, right? Like, it's just all of us are not 55, and those of us that are feel young, right? And we want to use something new, something exciting, right? Something that doesn't bother us with types all the time, except when we want that. And so, and then we construct them out of JSON objects. So there's a generational change, right? So when you get to why are all these companies using Node? A little excerpt out of is Groupon up there? But they use Node. They use lots of Node, like I think 800 servers worth. Anyway, these other companies also use Node, and they use it in production. These are the ones that at least have a public reference. So I have a list of like 100, but I always find the ones that are like job postings or something, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I can talk about it publicly, because we're not allowed, like, contractually to talk about it. So why are they doing it? Because Node is fast, as you know, and highly concurrent, importantly. Node is perfect for APIs, right? And it's JavaScript, and then you have all these, like, wonderful. If you need data points like this, you can either email me, or, like, on our website we have strongloop.com/whynode. and it like helps you build this case, right? And it gives you all the links to like, here's the IBM white paper that says Node was really good, right? Like here's the LinkedIn case study and so you can kind of, if you ever need to do the like why Node thing for your management or your friends, it's a good resource. You just go to our homepage. It's like why Node. Here's another great one, which is this is at a bank, a big, really well-known bank, who ran a bake-off between Node.js powered API and a Java powered API, using in both cases open source frameworks. We're not being recorded, right? On the Node.js side, they were using LoopBack, a framework designed for APIs. On the Java side, they were using also frameworks designed for APIs. So they were using Fuse. They actually tested 4: Spring integration, Fuse, Mule, and another one. And this data point here, the blue, represents the best performing of the 4, right? And the orange is Node, right? And on the left, you have a data point where the backend is very performant. So this is a API that has a backend, right? On the left side, the backend is performing. It's responding within 50 milliseconds. On the right side, the backend is taking much longer to respond. I think they bumped it up to 500 milliseconds or something like that. So when the backend slows down, you see the performance of the Java-based solution is terrible, right? The transactions per second there drops dramatically to under 1,000. And so this was the sort of performance that the data, right, that allowed them to go with a Node.js-based solution. It was also like pretty nice to have it be done on LoopBack, which I'll show you in a second. But first, what's coming up in Node past V12? So one thing is that I put a link in here. Actually, Bert and I wrote a blog post about this. It's a little speculative. It's a little like, here's like what we think could happen in the way distant future. So that's a good resource, but I'm not going to go into it because it's very speculative. Here's some really concrete things that need to happen immediately past V12. The first one is that we're stuck in Node today on a relatively old version of V8, and we can't upgrade because in the new versions of V8 they've changed the debugger interface. So if we were to upgrade, we'd break all the debuggers. Which StrongLoop, we maintain Node Inspector, which is a debugger, but there are also several other debuggers. Like there's one in Cloud9, there's one in WebStorm. There's a sort of decent one in Microsoft Visual Studio. So that's a big problem. So that needs to be fixed. And if there's anyone in here who wants to work on that, please, please do get in touch.
Well, why is it? I mean, besides the obvious fact that people would have to do work, so what? Like WebStorm is a product, right? So like, why is it that?
Oh, it's just that there would not. It's not just that they would have to do work. It's that there actually would not be a debugging interface at all. So today Node exposes a debugging interface by largely by using a V8 interface. But when that goes away, Node can't expose a debugging interface. So you'd have to sort of invent your own, right? You'd have to go use the new V8 debugging interface, and then you'd have to like construct from it a Node debugging interface. So it is just work, and it is something that potentially the vendors could do. But it makes sense for Node to expose a debugging interface, right? Because then everybody can use the same interface.
So eventually the Node team will have to do this?
Eventually someone's going to have to do this, yeah. And it's going to have to be upstreamed into Node.
This will bottleneck a lot of ES6 things, basically, right?
Yeah, so the current version of the node that's in the V8 that's in V12 does have Harmony. Yeah. So you have generators. But yeah, to the extent that there are bug fixes and other ES6 stuff coming, we can't upgrade V8. So that's definitely an issue.
Do you have a sense for like what was the magnitude of that block? Like, is that going to be months or weeks, or you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, like how much code is it? It's a decent chunk of work. How long is it going to take? Unclear, because I mean, difference between V10 and V12 wasn't really that big. It's been 18 months, so it's a little hard to say. So anyway, that's probably the top priority is at least past V12 is to fix that. Then there's sort of features, right? So going on to things that people want to upgrade, fix, change in Node. So probably I'll sort of start in the middle here. These are things that don't require code, right? So reference deployments and ecosystem, I think that's really important for the advancement of Node, but they don't require actually code being contributed to the repo. They require people, building stuff around Node. And that's happening. We're going to see some really cool announcements from Oracle next week. There's like an incredible ecosystem building around Node. Red Hat just bought a Node.js powered platform last week. They've suddenly been very interested in Node.js. I used to work there, so I've been getting some calls. There's really a nice ecosystem building around Node. I was really happy to see a support in Visual Studio. That WebStorm debugger is actually really nice. So that is good. The reference deployments, there are actually some pretty nice deployments out there that are not being talked about, and it would be terrific if the people who were doing those would talk a little bit more about them. One of the criticisms of Node is, well, it's only Yahoo and Groupon and eBay and PayPal and Netflix. It's all these kind of web companies. It's not like us, Midwestern insurance company, but that's not actually true, right? There are indeed sort of Midwestern insurance companies and New York-based banks and, railroad companies in Europe and stuff that are using Node.js and really interesting use cases in production, but they're not being so public about it. So it would be really terrific if those folks would talk about that. I think it would help the overall ecosystem quite a bit. But all of us that want to do a project in Node, right, we'd be like, yeah, here's one more data point we can point out. So that I think that would help, but that doesn't require code. So going up from there, the ops integration, I have a neat slide here. This is Node.js monitoring statistics. You see the event loop delay there in the graph? It being reported in Splunk, right? So this is cool. Like we need more of this. Because that's one more thing that holds Node back a little bit is that, like, it doesn't fit into our infrastructure, right? Like we use these tools here. And one of the things that I thought was really neat that happened recently was that Artifactory came out with support for Node modules, right? So a lot of corporate infrastructure relies on Artifactory, and them having that really helped those who wanted to, in particular, some companies in the Midwest who wanted to adopt Node to feel comfortable because they're like, oh yeah, we can put our modules in Artifactory. That's good, right? So as more people have support, this is an integration that we did from our monitoring agent into Splunk, and I think that's terrific, right? For people that have Splunk, they're like, yes, it just fits in. I don't have to have some special thing just for Node. So then another thing I want to talk about on that same line of thinking is this. You've probably all encountered, and I know I have, the issue that Node's asynchronous kind of call chaining style is difficult to track. And when you're coming from Java, you're used to sort of a stack trace, right, or Ruby or something. And in Node, of course, you can get a stack trace. It just doesn't tell you what you really want to know, which is like, what was the context of my request, right? Not what was the context of the particular function call, right? Because we have data being passed around in a callback style, we don't have data sitting on the stack being passed like that. So async tracker is an attempt to provide a tracking interface for asynchronous call chains. And it ultimately would allow you to construct graphs like this, right, where you can see like one thing is happening after another thing as part of a request chain, and maybe multiple things are happening at once, but they're all tied back. You can sort of see how they're tied back. Now, this is a graph from our monitoring tool, and some of this is possible today, but we're doing this with some trickery, and we're also not able to see as much as we'd like to, right? We're only able to see sort of external boundaries, not internal boundaries. So wouldn't it be nice if there was a way to do that? So there's this project on GitHub that I would love for you to give your feedback on and to contemplate, called Async Tracker. And it's a proposal for an API that would go into Node that would allow monitoring tools and debugging tools and tools that you write and tools that vendors write to be able to construct tracking chains of asynchronous calls. Does that make sense? Do I need to explain that more? So
different than async listener, which is like a buzzword a couple months ago?
Yeah, same goal as async listener, which was a project that was targeted at V12 and has been since removed because it didn't fully solve the problem, and the async tracker idea is very much derived from the work that was done in async listener. I think a lot of that work can be leveraged. This right now is not an implementation. It's a proposal for what the API would look like, right? And then an implementation would need to be done, right? So talking about things that need to be done in Node. But it would be very helpful if we could get feedback on the API itself before we go and do the implementation, right? Because then we're not like what happened with async listener is that we did the Trevor largely did the implementation and then found out that it didn't really solve all the use cases that people had. And a lot of work would need to go into optimizing the performance of such an interface. So it would be a fairly significant investment. So this would be really great if you could give some feedback on that. But just in terms of things that are coming up, this is a really good one, async tracker. And then another one that I want to get into is the idea of error tracking. Whoa, you can't really read that. Can you read that? Okay, so we've probably all encountered the issue that you think your code works fine, and then it just like crashes. Like it works fine, all your unit tests pass, and then it goes in production, it just crashes. And why does that happen? Well, through some analysis of why that, and when we take support calls, a lot of it's this stuff. Like a lot of it, right? It's like, and especially people are using async JS, and they're like, I thought this was supposed to happen, then this was supposed to happen because I'm using waterfall, and like something's blowing up and it's eating CPU, and I don't know why. And it's really hard to track, so the tracker would be helpful. But also when there's an error, you can't tell where the error happened, right? And what was sort of the context when the error happened. And furthermore, the error shouldn't really happen in the first place. One of the things that causes Node to not be so well adopted is that the recommended best practice for Node when you have an uncaught exception is to crash. Right? That is the recommended best practice. because Node is now in an inconsistent state, right? And the only way we have to clean that up is to crash the process and allow the operating system to clean everything up. This has been considered okay because Node recycles really quickly, right? And it's a I'm sure at Groupon, but I know at certain other big deployments, it's just like a regular practice to recycle the processes. And certainly when they crash, when there's an error, to just crash and recycle the process. Well, that makes ops people feel that this is unprofessional. I told you that was a toy, right? This JavaScript stuff is a toy. It's cool for the browser or whatever, but I'm not running that on my servers. It really, unfortunately, adds to that kind of perception that it's a toy, even if we accepted that it was okay to crash. And then if you have a philosophical difference with that and you feel, well, it's really not okay to crash, how are we going to recover? So just to mix this up for a second, here's a little coding challenge. So there are 3 errors in this code. There are 3 possible errors. And it's code that you would think, like you look at it, and you're like, oh. So this is implementing curl. Right? It's basically just a curl in Node.js. It fetches a URL and writes it to a file. It's hard to find, right? That's the problem. It's hard to find the errors because the code looks like it just makes sense. Okay, here they are. So the first one is relatively easy to find, right? So it's a synchronous callback. But the second one is actually really not easy to think about at all, which is that error and error, right, could both be returned, right? The interface here does not guarantee that only one of these callbacks is called, right? And so that's going to cause problems, right? And you can do a bunch of shenanigans around this to kind of catch both cases and try to handle them, but that's like completely not obvious, right? And the third one's even worse, which is that overall, do you see it down here? So overall, the problem is that the request object may return an event emitter, right? Because the interface in the request object can return an event emitter. So now you have to think about that, right? This is what makes Node annoying, right? Is dealing with this. So what, it would be nice to solve this. And then there's varied opinions about how that could be done. And of course, you don't want to change you can't change the language, right? And you don't want to change the programming paradigm, right? Like, so some of this you could fix with promises. So for example, the multiple callbacks issue would be fixed with promises, right? But then you have to do everything in promises. And although many people like promises, some people don't like promises. And there's, as Bert pointed out to me recently, back in 2009, Node actually had promises in core, right? And they were removed because they were considered not a good idea. Right? So there's, we don't know, like, if we put them back in, are they going to be a bad idea again? Like, right? And like, will generators just come and replace all of it? So in the sense that we need to support multiple coding styles, and in the sense that we can't change the language, this is a really interesting problem. So to explain how you might go about solving this problem, here's a diagram of how Node actually works. So this is a web server, basically. And you'll notice that there are two kind of paths. So two requests have been accepted, and they start there with the accept, right? All of the work that doesn't say CB is not JavaScript, right? So that's all work that libuv and v8 and the system calls are doing for you. So indeed, Node uses threads, not in JavaScript, but underneath, right? It's actually it's doing request handling on a thread and stuff. But what you notice is that the CB, that's the callback, that's Node calling your code, right? That is always happening not at the same time. So if time goes left to right, so you notice that all the callbacks don't happen at the same time. So what you're seeing is the event loop sort of splayed out, right? So the event loop is calling your different callbacks at different places and then interspersing other work on other threads, but always making sure that the JavaScript executes inline an event loop on a single thread, on a single process, right? So if you were to take like a slice of time through, you'd notice that only that one callback is executing right now, right? And that's the JavaScript engine that's going. So the fact that we're pinging between the two requests, and you can imagine this being 100 requests, is part of what makes it so difficult to, when something goes wrong, to get an error context, right? So what you want to be able to do, at least we hypothesize, or we postulate, is sort of draw a virtual sort of box around a particular code path, right? And then say, if there are any errors in this particular code path, then I want you to treat that error in a certain way, right? So for example, here, if there were an error in this request, even though the Node process pings in and out of it, if there were an error in this particular request path, then clean up the error, like handle the error and clean up all the resources that were used by the various functions, right? So in particular, if you made system calls, if you opened sockets, if you opened files, if you did any kinds of stuff like that, if you allocated memory, clean it all up. And in that way, you could continue, right? And only sort of allow that particular task or zone to error, right? And to be cleaned up. And so this idea has been implemented in a library called zones. And it's very similar to Angular zones. In fact, the two authors of the libraries have collaborated to make the syntax and the concepts compatible. In Node, it does quite a bit more because Node has access to resources that in the browser you don't have access to. So the Node version of zones actually does draw a sort of closure around the particular thing that you tell it to draw it around, in this case, a request. And when anything goes wrong, like an exception or an error, then it cleans up all affected resources and allows your process to continue. Right. So there's some debate about, is this the best way to do this, and about the particular implementation, and can it ever be fast? But the current implementation actually, when it's running in a tight loop, if you create a zone and do nothing inside, right? Destroy it and then create another one. If you run that, it only adds 18% overhead. So if you actually do things in the zone, the overhead's quite a bit lower. So in fact, we now have a performant implementation of this concept. I can show you a little bit of code about like what it does, or how you might use it, but you can also just look at this nice web page that points you to the GitHub repo that will let you play with this.
What is that overhead? Is that CPU? Is that memory?
CPU overhead, yeah. Because largely the overhead is keeping track of things, right? The other nice thing about this is that when there is an error, it'll give you something of a stack trace, or it'll give you it'll give you all the zones that you went through and all the things that it touched. So it does actually, because it's keeping track of all that stuff, it can print it out. And so that's a compromise between like what we know as a long stack trace, right, which gives you a long stack trace of things that aren't necessarily in the context you're interested in, right, and of like doing printfs on things that are interesting, right? So that's a pretty interesting idea, and I don't know whether it's this particular thing or something like it, but something like this, I think, is going to make its way into Node, because if you think about the top problems in Node that need to be solved, aside from the very tactical issue of the debugging thing, error tracking and asynchronous tracing are really two of the biggest ones, right? And probably the third one would be flow control, right? Or sort of callback hell, right? The Christmas tree or whatever. But that's an issue that's being addressed by a variety of language features like promises and generators, right? And so I believe that the frameworks, if anyone's used Koa, the generator-based framework, is actually a fairly decent solution to that, right? And people like it. So we're thinking that that's not an issue that needs to be solved in core, right? We just need to make stuff available in core, but that's actually a framework issue. And so I look forward to, for example, evolving Express to utilize some of these concepts, right? So that it'll be a little easier to write flow control that you can reason about, right? That you can understand and you can trace bugs in. Wow, that was a lot, huh? That was pretty thick. Okay, so because that was really thick, I thought I'd switch it up again and to like do some fun stuff for a minute. So back to demo land. I did promise in the abstract that I would like do a demo of this. So I want to demonstrate for you LoopBack. It's an open source framework that is designed specifically for creating APIs, RESTful APIs. So the way you start it is you just install it as npm module, and if you install it using the StrongLoop installer, you just npm install -g StrongLoop. If you do it that way, you get this tool called SLC. If you do it with LoopBack, then you get a Yeoman generator. So you can SLC or you can yo loop. So you can do yo LoopBack, but I'm going to use the other version, so you can just do SLC LoopBack. So you basically install this thing, and then you run the generator. And the generator is basically going to generate you a project with a REST API. So we're going to call our project Chicago. And it is going to generate a project for me. And then it's going to run npm install, which is going to take a minute.
Just jump in for a minute. I was telling Sean earlier, I noticed your project seemed to be one of the only ones that actually supported SQL Server.
Yes, indeed. Yes, so sure. So yeah, while we're waiting, I can give a slight overview of what this project does. So it's an API. It's designed as an API server. It's basically a framework that lets you build APIs, but it has a few things in it. One thing it has is an ORM, and that ORM is based on JugglingDB, which is a community project. There are connectors for all these things that you see on the right there. SQL Server is one, Oracle is one. So there's some enterprisey ones because this gets used a lot in enterprisey context. But there's also, of course, lovely open source ones like MongoDB and MySQL. It has some pre-built APIs, and that's what you see in the middle there. So if, for example, a push API is pre-built, a geo lookup is a function of all APIs that's provided by the framework. File is a pre-built API. That's a common mobile API. Like I need to store a file. So it has certain pre-built APIs. And then it also has SDKs. So when you build an API, it gives you an SDK for like iOS, Android, and Angular that automatically expose that API as an object in the native environment. So as in Angular, it says an Angular model. In iOS, it's as an iOS object. In Android, it's an Android object, right? So basically, you can work with a native object that gets automatically remoted via the API with the security stuff all done into the Node framework. And all this is open source. The other thing that's built in is security. So you have ACLs on every API that can be defined. And the general philosophy of the framework is that it's config. Why is that taking so long? It's config driven. So you basically, I'll just abort that and show you what it did, or what it tried to do. So it generates a set of config files and that are all JSON, and then this one doesn't have anything in it. So let me just pull open a different one. So if you go in server, so it has, sorry, let me write it. It has client, server, and common. If you go in common, because the models actually end up being available on the client and the server, which is cool, it's isomorphic. So you can actually use the models on the client side if you want. So you go models, and then there's config files. And this one I configured a car model. So if you go car.json, you'll see I configured a car model that has certain properties like make, color, whether it's rentable, and a VIN number. That gets exposed as an API. And indeed, the generator, all it does, we can go back actually, and where am I? So Chicago, if I, let's see, LoopBack model, it'll help me write these using the generator. So I can say I want a car. You can attach it to a data source. That's where you would attach it to SQL Server if you want. Do you want to expose this model as a REST API? Yes. And you might say no, because you might want to aggregate several models into an API. And it does support aggregation without coding. So you configure aggregation. And then you add properties. Like you say make, okay, it's a string. Yes, it's required. Color, it's a string. It's required. Rentable, it's a Boolean. You keep doing this, right? And it writes that file for you. So I'll just, for some reason, that one didn't work. So, but I'll, because I think my connection's not good. But I'll run this one. So node dot. Oh, I'm already running something on the other window. That's the issue. So close everything else I'm running. Oops, is there a node running? No. So run node again. Yeah. So then if you get a browser, just hit that. There's the server returning JSON already. If you hit /API, the models we created are exposed as resources automatically, and each entry will has an ID. I guess that didn't exist, so let's just. So if you don't know what the API is, there's a built-in API Explorer. Why does it say resolving host? Like it can't contact localhost? Hello. That seems odd, right? Okay. So these are the models, right, that we generated. The user's model is built in, and it has provisions for OAuth and stuff like that. And the other models are as you decide to generate them. The internet's not connected. To further sort of, you can, I don't know if this will work. yeah, so you can actually use the Explorer to try out the API. So we could like, it tells you how to make a query because it knows the schema, and then you can do that query and you get a response, right? And you can do all that in there. But the other thing that's available, and now I'm going to show you stuff that's not released. So this will be really interesting because it may not work. 30810. So there's kind of a GUI for this. Yeah, so you can launch a GUI and you can actually graphically edit your models. And you can say, like, I want to add a new model. I want to add a new property to this model. Like, we're going to add I don't know, options. And then you can say save, and that'll update the model. And then you can, probably what's more interesting is that you can add a data source, which can be any of these, like you mentioned, SQL Server. Configure your connection to that, and then attach it to a model. That causes the model to automatically be persisted. You can also go the other way, which is that you can attach a blank model to a data source, discover schema, and then pull things out of the schema and make them into models, right? And what's even crazy cool is that if you have a model that's connected to one data source, and then you connect it to another data source, it'll persist, so you can actually end up like synchronizing data sources by doing that. And the ORM is basically doing all that work for you. And now imagine connecting to several data sources, creating models from what's there, and then creating an aggregate model, right, that has a couple of properties from each one. So you might have like your user, your inventory database, and your cars database, right, like your models, your car type database. And you might want to just have a single REST API that says, well, what are available cars in my location? Right, this is like a single call. It's going to have to go query multiple things. You do that by aggregating models. And that's all taken. You can do that all in config. Right? If you then want to extend a model, each thing that is there, each model has a JavaScript file generated. So you just basically edit that JavaScript. You get passed in the object, and then you can add properties and functions and things to it to operate on the model. Some of them will be configuration, like you can encode, say I want to add an ACL instead of in config, right? Or you can actually add custom properties which execute your code on the model. This framework, by the way, is based on Express. So if you want to then use Express middleware and just plug that in, you can just plug Express middleware into it. So it's very flexible. It's nice and composable. You don't have to use it all together. Like if you only want the ORM, you can only use the ORM. You don't have to use the rest of it. And the SDKs are really nice as well. So if you only want to use the modeling and the SDKs, but you want to use your own backend, you can do that too. In Angular, it has a full SDK for Angular that exposes any model in the backend as a front-end model too in Angular. So you get Angular models or Node.js models. They get automatically remoted, and they have offline sync. So if you go offline, make changes to your Angular model, come back online, there's a replication protocol, which is based on CouchDB, but implemented in JavaScript. So this is like pretty neat. And we were inspired to create this by the sort of more enterprisey use cases of Node, and realizing that people were sort of creating these types of things out of Express. And we thought, like, wouldn't it be nice to just give that, like, have a thing for people to build on that would get them there, and then even start building up like this UI so that you don't even have to be that much of a coder, right? Like it's just time to project, right? Like if you can beat the other guys, then you win, right? So if the Node.js powered project can get there fast, then you get to use Node.js. It's one of the metrics by which people, if you look at the PayPal case study, like that's one of the big metrics that they use to convince everyone to use Node.js was, well, we wrote our project faster. So tooling like this can help to get you there. Anyway, that's a fun. I had to do another demo. All right, so I think we're nearing the end here. the last thing that I promised was to tell you what's coming up in Express. So StrongLoop, we're now one of the maintainers of Express. We do work with the community and the existing Express maintainers. So this is not too sexy, but it's actually really important, is that one of the things that's coming next in Express is better docs. It's probably the number one complaint, is actually that the docs aren't that great. So you can see that I printed out the Git history. We've been doing a lot of work there in recent months where there wasn't a lot of work in the past on the doc site. And then we've also, I think a big thing that is basically almost done is to move all the docs to Markdown. So that makes it much easier for anyone to contribute to the docs, right? Because previously they were in Jade templates and all this other weird stuff. So it was hard to work with them. And now you can just write Markdown and the site will get generated. So if you find a bug or something you want to add in the Express docs, please, you can just make a contribution. This is the issues list, and if the internet works, I'll pull it open. It's starting to look pretty low key. Like it's not too many open issues on the docs anymore. Wow, the switching is weird. Huh. Okay, I guess I can't click on things. All right. All right, well, GitHub, Loop, expressjs.com. Okay, there. And we're back to the same issue. Okay, no internet. Well, you can look it up yourself. Anyway, just go look at the issues list on the doc site. So that's one nice thing that we're doing. The next thing that's, I think, really cool. What happened to the is that so one thing. So Express 5 is we're on Express 4 right now. The next thing what Express 5 will be is actually not any new features, but essentially a refactoring. And what's happening is that the middleware that Express depends on is being refactored into a project called JS-HTTP. And then that middleware, in its refactored form, will actually be consumed and become the middleware used in Sales, Happy, and LoopBack, right? Which is super cool, right? Because what it means is that we're going to have a common set of middleware with that many more eyeballs on it, right? And that much more usage, so that we don't have sort of the division of different people working on different things, but all of this work can consolidate into one community-run open source project, JS-HTTP. And then Express itself will sort of turn largely, not entirely, but largely turn into a generator, right? Which basically composes this middleware into the framework that you know and love. Right, and then the idea is that can become a little more flexible over time. So then, maybe in Express 6 or something, if you say, well, I want to have Express with generator support, right? You can sort of tell that to the Yeoman generator, and it'll configure your middleware that way. So I think this is a nice evolution, and I can't take credit. I didn't come up with this. It was really something that Doug Wilson came up with, and we're just helping along, and everybody working in this community is trying to help along to get to this place so that these frameworks can share the same code, and so that everybody can sort of benefit from increased velocity and code quality on that stuff. I don't know when this is going to happen. It's going to take a while. There's most people working on Express are volunteers. We have a couple of people that are paid to work on it, but they also work on other stuff. So it may be a while, but anyway, that's generally the direction for Express, and I think it's I don't know, tell me what you think, but I think it's kind of cool. It's good direction.
Is this like dealing with the limitations of Connect in terms of like streams and things like that? Is that part of this? Or I'm surprised that you built a REST API on top of Express because of that limitation, because you can't stream by default. So are you using your own middleware that's stream friendly, or are you not doing streams, or like what's going on there?
Yeah, we're not doing streams, but there is the ability to use other middleware. So a common thing is for people to plug in Socket.io, right? So there's definitely, so in LoopBack you can plug in Socket.io and use that as your transport instead of Connect, and then you have a streams-based. And yeah, that's probably exactly how the future looks, right? Is that the middleware sort of becomes swappable, and stuff like, I hope that stuff like Primus will sort of make its way into the same, JS HTTP project, so that we all have nice, reliable middleware that we can depend on, and we can compose however we like. And then when we build higher level things like Sales and LoopBack and Happy and whatever else we're building on top, we like LoopBack, but people are building all kinds of stuff that we can just take that middleware and plug it in, right, and use it for what we want. And obviously, Node has a philosophy of being super modular. So there would be really contentious if I said, there should be a standard library, right? but at the same time, we have the emergence of a de facto standard library, right? And this kind of a thing helps that to happen and gets us some of the goodness of that, which is more eyeballs and more code quality without sort of the part that conflicts with the Node philosophy, which would be the highly modular, very swappable idea, right? That's always finding a compromise.
Really see the Primus coming probably in the year next year, because I know with the sales group, Primus, it fits a lot with our ideas of pretty much plug and play to whatever you need it to do. So let's say you got a server that does this or that, and then sales just molds to however you want it. And Primus, because you could exchange and use any kind of real-time engine, it works out great. Because the ORM we're using there called Waterline, that one you could use any database you want, and it just works with it. And then you could do cross-database associations. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah. Actually, it'd be nice, right, to see one of the ORMs go into the same kind of condition.
How modular are those? Is that ORM layer that you guys have?
Ours is very modular, very modular.
Like that, from a user's point of view, I always feel like that's painful.
Yeah, exactly. It sucks. And most people that are using it are really happy that we're maintaining it because it's a pain. And one of the nice things that it has is actually it has REST and SOAP connectors. So the SOAP connectors automatically discover WSDL, which is neat, right? So you basically point it at SOAP and WSDL, it discovers that and maps it into a model, which is cool. And that REST similarly, right? Go get some resources, map those into models. I'm going to recompose them, combine them with stuff from databases, and then expose models again, right? Or more REST. That's a really common use case. Well, I showed you that, yeah.
But I mean, could you use that, in the way that a person tends to use an admin interface to look at things? And then also, is that Studio extensible in some way?
Yeah. So actually, thank you. That's a great segue. I'm done. I'm going to end with like a little teeny advertisement. This is what we do commercially. I'm here to be part of the community. I don't care if you buy our stuff. But if there's something helpful that we can do for you, like training or whatever, let us know. We do sell certain things, and Studio is indeed intended to become that. So it's is very modular, it's pluggable, and our intention is to plug administrative modules into it that allow for DevOps people to kind of administer a deployed mesh of API services. That's how we think our business model is going to work, right? We like to do a lot of community stuff, but we have to support ourselves somehow. Today we do that with training, consulting, support, et cetera. That's going really well. This seems like another opportunity for us that would allow us to continue to contribute open source like LoopBack, but still give people a professional experience if they want to have a professional experience that would cost us more to support. On that note, I want to introduce Jamie, who's over there. She brought, we together brought T-shirts and little USB dongles. So if you want to go grab one of those, there's different sizes and stuff. I apologize if we don't have your size. If we don't, get a USB dongle, or if there's something you really wanted, email me or something, and I'll send it to you. My Twitter handle is IJRoth, and my email address is iroth@strongloop.com. So please just send me anything you want. And complaints, I get lots of complaints, so just go for it. If you want to like send me, gossip about like Join or something, that's cool too. But if you want to contribute to something, that would be wonderful. We'd love to work with you. And thank you very much for having me. And I can take questions, but don't feel like you have to hang around. You can go get T-shirts if you want. Thanks a lot. Is there anybody who wants to ask something that the whole group would benefit from? Yeah.
How hard is it to write your own adapt
For the front end? Yeah, it's really easy actually. So the interface for the the question is what if I wanted to write my own SDK? Like I want to support a Windows Phone SDK or like a Tessel SDK or I'm super into the Tessel. It's really easy. The interface you'd use is called Strong Remoting. It's again an NPM module, but essentially the interface is REST, right? So all these SDKs there's just wrappers around REST that they understand a particular REST pattern, because as you know, REST is not perfectly standard, right? and they understand a particular set of JSON, which you saw, right? And they transmute that into native objects. So in fact, there has been someone who already wrote one. There's someone who wrote one for Ember. Okay. So if you email me, actually, I'll point you at it and you can collaborate, because I think they got halfway there already.
Are you looking to supporting like the JSON API standard, or
Well, actually, one step better. LoopBack now natively supports Swagger. So if you don't know about Swagger, you got to check out Swagger. Swagger is a standard for defining APIs. It's based on JSON schema, right? So it's a particular form of JSON schema that defines a REST API. And I'm super bullish about Swagger because I think it's going to become kind of the standard, like the WSDL